or sorry, those are the three for the first one. And then there's this action risk, and then there's the third is inaction. So the action inaction, the sum of those is going to be 100 points. So they're each individually 50. And then the total for the authenticity, which is that first group with the three subgroups underneath it, is going to be 100.
Okay.
And how those are broken out is based on the weighting of the questions that Katie and team have come to. So really from the UI perspective, I go through and I answer all these questions.
Mm-hmm.
In the back end, which I'll dive into in a minute, all of these questions have a certain weighting, and that's how we break out that, let's talk about that authenticity. So each of these is worth a certain amount of points based on how much weight it has. And at the end of the day, we've set it up so it'll always add up to 100 points, no matter how many questions there are or the weighting we've provided each of them. We've calculated it so it takes 100, breaks it out however we've set this base layer up, and then that way we always aggregate up to 100 for authenticity, 50 for action risk, 50 for inaction risk.
So in that authenticity though, you had kind of like subcategories of the territory, stakeholder, and alignment. Is that always a certain number, or that would be just that whole authenticity section is 100?
Yeah, so right now how it's set up, it's question driven. It's down at the question level. So and this will actually show you. So yeah, so you can see each of the questions has a weight associated with it. So like, does this fall in? Let me actually make this bigger. I realize it's pretty small. And then I'll hide these two. So this first question, does it fall into this issue fall within the advocacy territory? It has a weight of 3 versus a weight of 2 for does Stagwell have a supportive? So if I change this to a 1 or a 5, it would actually change the weighting for the overall territory section. So we don't say like territory is this amount, stakeholders this amount. We do it at the question level, and then the territory weighting can vary depending on what the weight of the questions underneath that bucket are.
Okay. Potential score, final score.
So I think this is the case where we may have to have a different one for each client, right? Because the weights are going to be different for each question, unless there's a way to do it on the back end, right, to change it like an Excel sheet.
Yeah, I mean, with that underneath that final score, and I guess I'm trying to figure out how you get the final score and the potential score from just the simple 3, 2, 1 weight. Like how is that being calculated?
Yep. Let me do that. So that cleaned it up a little bit. So I think, yeah, so really for that question is these 3 fields. I'll highlight them in red. Why is it? There we go. So this is where, so let's just focus on, let's actually do action just because it's a little cleaner and we just have like one section with 6 questions. So what it's doing is taking the overall score that we've allocated to it, so 50, and then dividing it by however many, or the sum of all the weights. So that's saying at one question, a weight of 1 is worth this amount, and then we multiply it out to say, all right, this is actually worth 2 of that, so that gets 2 times 3, 5.
Okay.
And that way we can, so
you just basically did 50 divided by 11.5, which gives you 4.35.
Yep.
Multiplied then by, so if somebody got 2, effectively they'd be getting 9-ish or close to 9 there.
Yep, correct.
Okay. 8.69. Yeah. Okay. So I see that. So where's that where's the 1.86 from final score? What's that one? How's that?
Yeah, so that's taking in the scoring rubric, matrix, whatever you want to call it. So all of those, and I'll actually jump back real quick. So that's when they're actually answering the questions. So I say, definitely not, which would be like essentially the lowest score versus definitely yes, which would be the highest score. So if we're thinking back to action, that's that 4.36 or 3.5, whatever it is.
So definitely yes would be equal to 4.35, you're saying?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And we bucketed it in 20%. So if you think of like the answer matrix, not at all significant only gets you 20% of the maximum points available, and extremely significant gets you 100%. So if we're sticking with action, max would give you 4.35. Not significant at all would give you a 0.87.
Okay. And then, so where does 1.86 come from?
That one, it's taking the 2 multiply. Oh, hold on. Sorry. Yeah, so what it's doing is taking that 2 times 9.3.
So where's the 9.3 coming from? What's that looking up?
So the answer is definitely not, which gives us that 0.93 here.
Oh, so this is, and that's basically, can you scroll over to the right there?
Yeah.
So that's definitely not is only giving you 20%.
Correct.
Of the value?
20% of the value.
Of the 4.35.
Yep.
Which
And
is
so
the
that's essentially
0.8.
how it works. We're looking up this value in this matrix and then multiplying it by the weight to give us the final score.
Okay, so hold on. Let me just I'm trying to backtrack here. So each answer of 1 would be 4. So the whole thing was 9. So it's basically 20% of 9 is just the 1.8. Okay. No, that makes I'm tracking there.
Cool.
And then so basically when I'm looking at, so the 50 ones, it's obviously it's only whatever 6 questions, but in theory you might have 10 questions on that section, right?
Correct.
So then at that point, and you can weight them whatever you want, but then I have to basically take the sum of all the weights, divide it by 50 divided by that, and that gets me my scoring algorithms. And then you also have so the question has a weight, but then the answers themselves, are they always going to be this 180, 60, 40, 20 kind of rubric there? Or do you want to have options to say, if I answer extremely significant, I get 100, but if I answer very significant, instead of 80, I might get 90 for that 1% of the value?
Yeah, and I'll lean to Katie on that. This was the one we came up with originally, but it's not, it's flexible.
Because what I could do, just so because these answers, you're basically saying you want them to be extremely significant, very significant, moderately, whatever. In theory, they can be labeled whatever you want. So, if you want to say, yes, turtles are my favorite, in the answer, we can do that. And then you would just say, okay, if they answer that, it's 86%. Like, in theory, because the calculations to me make sense, and it's just plugging in whatever number. And I can hard code those numbers so you don't have to choose them every time, or I can make that very open-ended so that you can sort of, really have a lot of fine-tuned control over it. So Like to me, this algorithm, I can run with this. You give me this Excel sheet, I can recreate it 100%. It makes perfect sense to me. Um, but it just, unless there's something other, like I feel like I know that, and I guess let me go back to the sort of the one that's the top, where it's the stakeholder and action alignment and that.
Yeah.
In theory, it's the same thing where I'm basically summing that whole D column of the three groups, and
Yep.
that gets 100 divided by that comes up with all these values, right? Whether they're in these different sections really doesn't it doesn't factor into the calculations. Whether you put 4 questions in territory and 2 questions in stakeholder, that doesn't make a difference to the algorithm, correct?
Correct. All it's doing, like the driver is the weight,
Right.
by question, because essentially what we're doing is saying, all right, we have 100 points available. What is 1 unit of weight? What is that value? And then we figure out the scores from there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean this was exactly the document I was looking for. I mean, I can recreate that if that's what we we want, and it seems perfectly reasonable. All the variables.
Yeah, that's great. I think so for this, which we've got squared away, we have approval on for our own internal microsite that you're working on, Brett. And then from there, there's this larger question around, okay, so how do we then replicate this for our value-added service client upsell piece? And I think that gets to your question around, like, do I hard code this in on the back end, or can we allow room for flexibility? And I think definitely with this process, every time we do it for a different client, even for ourselves to get to this point, every time we talk through something, there's even with the conversation we had with you, Brett, there was like a really good nugget around, well, actually, do we want to have an entry form where the person doing the questionnaire can put their email and then we get their score individually, whereas before we were running through this process with the group, the rapid response team of like you do it as a team, but actually there's something interesting around doing it individually. So each time we talk about it, there's a new kind of idea that comes out.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a very fluid, evolving process for each client. There's very different issues, and each of the buckets are going to have different questions. I think that's easy enough to tailor the questions. The piece that is beyond my pay grade is how you alter that algorithms to evolve with the changing questions. And so if we can just build it in a way that we can be tweaking that on the back end, because this is absolutely going to change each time we build it for a different client.
And the thinking behind that is the way that sort of the the system works right now really is that you create this version 1, and we have the weights worked out, we have the questions worked out, we have the answers all worked out. Like literally it's a single click of a single button to duplicate that, and then you can go and edit the values. Like
Okay.
we want to add a question into here, and we want to have that question be equal to a weight of 5 or 1 or whatever it is. So I think as long as the algorithm calculations are consistent from section to section, whatever you weight those values is completely up to you, and that to me is easy enough to do. Because I'll tell you, the other thing that I will be doing in here is effectively I'm going to have, okay, this group of questions has a final weight of 100, and so if you want to add another whole section of questions that has a weight of 50, we can add that in there as well. Because really I'm just basically saying, okay, this group of questions equals 100, this group equals 50, this group equals 50, but you can add as many of those sections as you want, and and the final value being whatever you want. If you wanted the final value to be 66 and 33 on 2 of them, that will be completely up to you. And like but the